A mail-order bride steps off a train at the wrong stop in the frozen wasteland of 1873 Nevada, penniless, abandoned, with nowhere to go. The man she was supposed to marry is 200 miles away, and the next train won't come for weeks. As she sits alone in the snow, ready to give up everything, a small hand tugs at her dress. A little girl with tears in her eyes whispers 4 words that will change 3 lives forever. Daddy needs you. But can a stranger become family? Can a mistake become destiny? Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train's whistle tore through the frozen air like a scream, and then it was gone. Clara Whitmore stood alone on a platform that barely deserved the name. Just weathered planks half buried in snow, listing to one side as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them. Her breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the gray nothing of a Nevada winter afternoon. She held her broken suitcase with both hands, feeling the cold metal handle bite through her thin gloves, and watched the black shape of the locomotive shrink into the distance until it became a dot, then a memory, then nothing at all. This wasn't supposed to happen. The conductor had called out something she hadn't quite heard over the noise of the engine. She thought he'd said, "Ash Point, 10 minutes." So she'd gathered her belongings and made her way to the door, ready to step into her new life. But the moment her boots hit the snow, she realized her mistake. This wasn't Ash Point proper. This was a coal stop, a supply depot, a place where trains paused to take on water and fuel, not passengers. The real town was still miles down the line. She had tried to get back on. She'd called out, waved her arms, even run a few desperate steps alongside the accelerating cars. But the train had already committed to leaving, its great wheels churning with mechanical indifference, and within seconds it had left her behind in a swirl of steam and coal smoke. Now she stood in the aftermath of her mistake, and the silence was crushing. Clara forced herself to look around, to take inventory of her situation with the same practical mind that had gotten her this far. The depot consisted of a small wooden shed, its door hanging crooked on broken hinges, and a water tower that creaked in the wind. Beyond that, scattered across the white landscape like a child's abandoned toys, were perhaps a dozen buildings. Shacks, really, huddled together as if for warmth. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. A single muddy road cut through the center of what couldn't generously be called more than a camp. This was Ash Point Station. Not a town, not even close. Her suitcase chose that moment to give up entirely. The latch she'd been nursing along for the past 3 states finally broke, spilling her belongings into the snow. 2 dresses, a change of undergarments, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and the bundle of letters tied with string. Samuel Thornton's letters. Her intended husband's careful, formal proposals written on good paper with proper ink, each one making the arrangement clearer, the promises larger, the expectations heavier. She had never met Samuel Thornton. She knew only what the letters told her. He was a businessman in Ash Point proper, a man of means who needed a wife to manage his household and provide him with heirs. The arrangement was practical, loveless, and utterly final. She would marry him within a week of her arrival. That was the agreement. Clara knelt in the snow and began gathering her things with numb fingers. The letters were wet now, the ink beginning to run. She shoved them into the bottom of the broken suitcase and tried to make the latch hold, but it was hopeless. She would have to carry everything in her arms. A practical woman would assess her options. Clara forced herself to think. Option 1, wait for the next train. But the schedule posted inside the shed, water-stained and barely legible, suggested the next eastbound wouldn't arrive for 6 days and the next westbound for 5. Even if she had enough money for a ticket, which she didn't, that was nearly a week of waiting in this frozen nowhere. Option 2, find shelter and telegraph Samuel to send someone for her. But the depot shed had no telegraph office, no ticket window, nothing but a broken stove and a bench missing half its slats. If this place had a telegraph at all, it would be in one of those distant buildings, and she had no idea which one or if anyone would help her. Option 3, walk to Ash Point proper. According to the map Samuel had sent, the main town was 15 miles west along the rail line. 15 miles. In her city boots and thin coat, carrying a broken suitcase through snow that was already past her ankles, with perhaps 3 hours of daylight left, and the temperature dropping by the minute. There was no good option. There was only survival. Clara closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. This was it. This was the end of the road that had started 6 months ago in Philadelphia when her father died, leaving behind nothing but debts and a daughter no one wanted. This was the destination of every desperate choice she'd made since, selling everything she owned, answering Samuel Thornton's advertisement for a mail-order bride, climbing aboard a series of westbound trains with just enough money to reach Nevada and not a penny more. She had gambled everything on a future with a stranger, and now she couldn't even reach him. The wind picked up, cutting through her coat like a knife. Clara opened her eyes and made herself stand. She gathered her belongings as best she could, cradling them against her chest, and began walking toward the closest building, a long, low structure that might have been a general store or supply depot. Someone there would know what to do. Someone there would help her. She made it 3 steps before her boot found a patch of ice beneath the snow. Her feet went out from under her and she fell hard, landing on her side with an impact that knocked the air from her lungs. Her belongings scattered again across the white ground. For a moment she just lay there, too stunned and cold and tired to move. This was how people died out here, she realized. Not in sudden disasters, but in small degrees. A fall, a missed train, a wrong turn. Just a series of mistakes that added up to nothing. "Miss?" The voice was small and uncertain. Clara turned her head and saw a child standing a few feet away, so bundled in wool and fur that only her face was visible. A small, solemn face with dark eyes and wind-chapped cheeks, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. "Miss, are you hurt?" the child asked again. Clara pushed herself up to sitting. I'm all right, just clumsy." The little girl came closer, moving with the careful steps of someone used to icy ground. She knelt and began picking up Clara's scattered things, the hairbrush, a dress, one of the soaked letters. She handled everything with grave concentration, as if these small acts of kindness were very important. "Thank you," Clara managed. Her voice came out rough. "You don't have to— Papa says we help people who need help," the child said simply. She held out the items she'd collected, and Clara took them with shaking hands. Up close, the child was even smaller than Clara had first thought, but there was something old in her eyes, a kind of careful watchfulness that suggested she'd learned early to read the world for danger. Her coat was patched but clean, and the scarf around her neck had been mended with neat, tiny stitches. "What's your name?" Clara asked, because she didn't know what else to say. "Lily." The girl paused, then added, "Lily Blackridge. What's yours?" "Clara Whitmore." She tried to smile and wasn't sure if she managed it. "I seem to have gotten off the train at the wrong place." Lily nodded as if this was a perfectly reasonable mistake. "The conductor doesn't always say things loud enough. Mama used to miss stops too before—" She stopped abruptly and something closed behind her eyes. Before. Before. That one word carried the weight of everything it didn't say. Clara felt a pang of recognition so sharp it hurt. She knew that before. She had her own version of it, before her mother died, before her father drank himself into an early grave, before the world became a series of closed doors and impossible choices. Loss was loss, no matter what shape it took. "Well, Lily Blackridge," Clara said, making her voice as steady as she could, "I'm very glad to meet you. You've been kinder to me in 5 minutes than most people are in a lifetime." Lily's serious expression cracked just slightly, the hint of a smile appearing and disappearing like a shy animal. She reached into her coat and pulled out a handkerchief, threadbare but clean, embroidered in one corner with a tiny blue flower. She held it out to Clara. "You're crying," she said matter-of-factly. "Papa says it's all right to cry, but you should have a handkerchief." Clara hadn't realized she was crying. She touched her face and felt the wetness there, already starting to freeze. She took the offered handkerchief and pressed it against her cheeks. The cotton smelled like wood smoke and soap. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat together in the snow for a moment, a strange tableau, the desperate woman and the solemn child, while the wind moaned through the wooden buildings and the daylight began its slow fade toward evening. Clara knew she should get up, should find shelter, should do something other than sit here letting the cold seep deeper into her bones. But she was so tired. She had been tired for so long, and this final blow felt like more than she could carry. "You can't stay here," Lily said, reading Clara's exhaustion with that uncanny insight children sometimes have. You'll freeze. I know. Clara tried to gather her things again, but her hands wouldn't quite work right. I need to find... My daddy needs you, Lily said suddenly. Clara blinked, confused. I'm sorry? My daddy, Lily repeated, and now there was urgency in her young voice, as if she'd just understood something very important. He needs you, please. You have to come. Lily, I don't think... But the child was already standing, already tugging at Clara's arm with surprising strength. Please, she said again, and there were tears in her dark eyes now, bright and desperate. Please come. He needs help. We need help. Everyone left and there's no one else and you're here and please, please don't leave too. The words came out in a rush, a child's plea stripped of pretense or manipulation, just pure need, raw and honest. Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, some locked room she'd been keeping sealed against exactly this kind of hurt. She couldn't help herself. God knew she needed help more than she could give it. But she couldn't leave this child standing here crying in the snow, couldn't walk away from that desperate pleas. All right, Clara heard herself say. All right, I'll come. Show me. Lily's whole face transformed. She grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her to her feet with more force than such a small body should possess. Clara managed to scoop up her belongings. She would have to leave the broken suitcase, but she could carry the dresses and letters and her few possessions in her arms. Lily was already moving, half running through the snow toward one of the buildings at the far edge of the settlement, and Clara stumbled after her. They passed a handful of people, men in heavy coats who watched with flat, incurious eyes, a woman hanging laundry despite the cold who turned her back as they approached. No one called out. No one offered help. Clara felt the weight of their indifference, like a physical thing. This was a place where people kept to themselves and expected the same from others. This was a place where you could die alone, even surrounded by others. Lily led her to a small cabin set slightly apart from the rest, squat and solid, built from logs that had been chinked against the wind, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A lean-to beside it sheltered a forge, currently cold, and racks of metalwork in various stages of completion. A blacksmith's workshop. The front door opened before they reached it. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. He was tall, taller than any man Clara had seen in months, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that came from years of hard labor. Dark hair, dark beard, features carved by weather and work into something stern and unreadable. He wore a leather apron over his shirt despite the cold, and his sleeves were rolled up to show forearms corded with muscle and marked with the fine white scars of his trade. "Lily," he said, and his voice matched his appearance, low and rough, meant for stating facts rather than making conversation. "What have I told you about running off when—" He stopped. His eyes found Clara standing behind his daughter, and something flickered across his face too quick to read. "Papa!" Lily pulled Clara forward with both hands now, as if afraid she might escape. "Papa, this is Miss Clara. She got off the train wrong, and she's all alone, and she needs help. And I found her, and I told her you need help too, and she said yes. She said she'd come, and—" "Lily!" The man's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through his daughter's breathless explanation. "Slow down." He looked at Clara properly now, taking in her wet clothes, her armload of belongings, the exhaustion that must have been written all over her face. His expression didn't change, but Clara saw his jaw tighten slightly. "My daughter is right," he said after a moment. "You need to come inside. It's too cold to be standing out here." It wasn't quite an invitation. It was more of a statement of fact, delivered in that same neutral tone. But Clara was cold enough and desperate enough not to care about the niceties. "I don't want to impose," she said, because that was what a lady was supposed to say. "If you could just point me toward—" "There's nowhere else," the man interrupted. "Not that will take you, not this late. Come inside, get warm, and then we'll sort out what's to be done." He turned and walked back into the cabin, assuming she would follow. Lily still had hold of Clara's hand, tugging her forward with that same desperate urgency. Clara took a breath, gathered what remained of her pride, and stepped over the threshold into the warmth. The cabin was small but well made, everything in it speaking of careful maintenance and hard-won comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, fire crackling behind an iron grate that looked like it had been forged by the owner's own hands. A table, 4 chairs, shelves lined with simple dishes. 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. Dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. A rag rug on the floor, faded but clean. The whole place smelled like wood smoke, bread, and the metallic tang of the forge. Clara stood dripping on the threshold, suddenly aware of how she must look. Bedraggled, desperate, a stranger bringing cold and wet into someone else's warm home. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm making a mess of your floor." "Floor has seen worse." The man moved to the fireplace and added another log, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "Lily, help Miss Whitmore," Clara supplied. "Clara Whitmore." "Help Miss Whitmore with her coat," he finished, "and put the kettle on." Lily jumped to obey, suddenly full of purpose and energy. She helped Clara out of her wet coat and hung it by the fire, then scurried to fill a kettle from a bucket near the door. Clara stood awkwardly in the center of the room, still holding her bundle of belongings, not sure where to put them or herself. The man turned to face her properly for the first time. In the firelight, Clara could see him more clearly, somewhere in his early 30s, weathered beyond his years, with gray eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to trust easy things. There was no meanness in those eyes, but no softness either. Just a kind of careful distance, like a man who'd been burned before and learned to keep the fire at arm's length. "Jonah Blackridge," he said, offering his hand. Clara shifted her bundle and shook his hand. His grip was warm and work-roughened, careful not to squeeze too hard. "Clara Whitmore. I'm grateful for your kindness, Mr. Blackridge. I got off at the wrong stop and I'm trying to reach Ash Point proper. If you could tell me how to arrange transportation, I'll be out of your way as soon as—" "Nothing's going to Ash Point proper until morning at the earliest," Jonah said. "Storm's coming in tonight. You can see it in the sky, smell it on the wind. Anyone with sense is already settled in." Clara looked at him, then at Lily, who was carefully measuring tea into a pot with the concentrated focus of a child performing an important task. Understanding began to dawn, cold and heavy. "You're saying I'm stuck here," she said quietly. "I'm saying you're not going anywhere tonight." Jonah pulled out one of the chairs at the table. "Sit. Get warm. Lily will make tea and there's bread and butter if you're hungry. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you where you're going." It was the most he'd said since she arrived, and beneath the gruff practicality, Clara heard something else. Not quite kindness, but not its opposite either. More like resigned hospitality, the sense of a man doing what he knew was right, even if it complicated his life. She should refuse. She should insist on finding somewhere else, anywhere else. A respectable woman didn't spend the night in a widower's home, especially not a woman on her way to marry another man. But Clara was too cold and tired and frightened to care about respectability anymore. "Thank you," she said, and sat. Lily brought tea in mismatched cups, her small hands steady despite the pot's weight. She poured carefully, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, then handed Clara the first cup with a smile that transformed her solemn little face into something that hurt to look at. That brightness, that uncomplicated generosity that children could still manage even when the world had been unkind. "It's not very good tea," Lily admitted. "We ran out of the good kind. But Papa says any tea is better than no tea when you're cold." "Your Papa is a wise man," Clara said, wrapping both hands around the cup and letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. She took a sip and tasted cheap leaves and melted snow water, but it was hot, and that was enough. "And this is exactly what I needed." Jonah sat across from her, his own cup untouched, watching her with that careful neutrality. Clara met his eyes and saw him making calculations, weighing risk against necessity, trying to figure out what kind of trouble she might be. "You said you're trying to reach Ash Point," he said. "You have family there?" "No." Clara hesitated, then decided there was no point in lying. "I'm meeting a man there, Samuel Thornton. We're to be married." Something flickered in Jonah's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. "Samuel Thornton," he repeated, "the land speculator." There was no inflection in his voice, but Clara heard the judgment anyway. "Yes, we've been corresponding. I'm to be his wife." His wife? Jonah's eyes went to her bundle of belongings, the broken suitcase she'd had to abandon, the wet dress she was still wearing. He didn't send anyone to collect you? He doesn't know I've arrived. The train wasn't supposed to stop here. I got off by mistake. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks. It was my own fault. I wasn't paying attention. Lily, who had been listening with frank curiosity, piped up, "Are you going to love him?" "Lily," Jonah said, but his daughter ignored him. "Mama said you should only marry someone if you love them," Lily continued. "Do you love Mr. Thornton?" Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. How did you explain practicality to a child who still believed in love? How did you say that sometimes survival was more important than affection, that sometimes you married a stranger because the alternative was starving alone in a city that had no use for you? "I'm sure we'll grow to care for each other," she said finally. "That's how these arrangements work." Lily frowned, clearly dissatisfied with this answer, but Jonah gave his daughter a look that made her bite back whatever she'd been about to say. "Samuel Thornton's a wealthy man," Jonah said. "Got fingers in half the business in Ashpoint. You could do worse." It might have been reassurance. It might have been warning. Clara couldn't quite tell. "I'm very fortunate," she said, because that was what she was supposed to believe. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind beginning to pick up outside. Clara finished her tea and felt warmth spreading through her chest for the first time in hours. Her clothes were beginning to dry, leaving her feeling heavy and uncomfortable, but no longer in danger of freezing. "There's a room," Jonah said abruptly. "Used to be. It's empty now. You can sleep there tonight. I'll take you to Ashpoint in the morning if the weather clears. If it doesn't, you'll have to wait it out here until it does." Clara looked at him, this stern, scarred stranger who was offering her shelter without asking for anything in return. "I can't impose on you like that. There must be somewhere else." "There's not." Jonah's voice was flat. "The boarding house burned down last winter and hasn't been rebuilt. The saloon doesn't rent rooms to women, and even if it did, you wouldn't want to stay there. There's nowhere else. You can stay here, or you can freeze. Those are your options." He stood, the conversation clearly over in his mind, and began clearing away the tea things. Lily jumped up to help him, the two of them moving together with the easy synchronization of long practice. Clara watched them and felt a strange pang of something she couldn't quite name. Envy, perhaps, or longing. They were a family. Incomplete and scarred, but still a family. They had each other. She had no one. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly, I don't know what I would have done if Lily hadn't found me." Jonah paused in his work, his back to her. "Lily has a habit of finding things that need finding," he said, and there was something in his voice now, affection, exasperation, worry, all mixed together. "Sometimes I wish she wouldn't. He turned and met Clara's eyes. "You should know that people will talk. A strange woman staying in my house, even for a night. People will have opinions about that. If that matters to you, if it'll cause problems with this man you're supposed to marry, you should tell me now." Clara thought about Samuel Thornton and his careful letters, his lists of expectations and requirements. She thought about his detailed description of the house he owned, the servants he employed, the position she would be expected to occupy in Ashpoint society. She thought about what he might say if he learned his mail-order bride had spent even one night under another man's roof. Then she thought about the alternative, freezing alone in that broken depot shed, or worse. "I don't care what people think," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Jonah nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected about her. "All right then, Lily, show Miss Whitmore to the room, and find her something dry to wear. One of your nightgowns should fit, even if it'll be short on her." "Yes, Papa." Lily grabbed Clara's hand again with that same enthusiasm, pulling her toward one of the doors. "Come on, Miss Clara, you can have Mama's room. Papa hasn't changed anything in it, so it's all still nice." Clara let herself be led, but she caught the way Jonah's shoulders tensed at Lily's words, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. Mama's room. The room that used to belong to the woman whose absence hung over this little cabin like smoke. The room was small and spare, containing only a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a lamp. But it was clean and dry, and the bed had quilts piled high against the cold. On the wall hung a simple dress and a shawl. In the corner stood a pair of boots, worn but well-maintained, waiting for someone who would never wear them again. Clara felt like an intruder, stepping into this preserved space, this shrine to someone's vanished life. "Mama died 2 winters ago," Lily said matter-of-factly, pulling open a drawer and rummaging for a nightgown. "She got sick and couldn't get better. Papa tried everything, but nothing worked. Sometimes people just die," he says, "even when you don't want them to." She said it with a child's brutal honesty, stating facts without quite understanding their full weight. Clara's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry, Lily." "It's all right." Lily found a nightgown and handed it to Clara, white cotton, carefully mended in several places. "Papa says she would have wanted someone to use her things. He says it's wasteful to let everything just sit. But he can't bring himself to move them, so they just stay here and wait." Clara took the nightgown, folding it carefully in her arms. "You must miss her very much." "Every day?" Lily said simply. "But Papa misses her more. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. He's sad all the time, even when he's trying not to be. That's why when I saw you, I thought—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "Thought what?" Lily looked up at her with those 2 old eyes. "I thought maybe you could make him less sad. I know that's silly. You're getting married to someone else and you don't even know us. But I thought it anyway." Clara knelt down so she was eye level with the child. "That's not silly, Lily. That's kind. You have a kind heart, and that's worth more than most people realize." Lily threw her arms around Clara's neck in a sudden, fierce hug. Clara froze for a moment, startled, then slowly brought her own arms up to hold the child. They stayed like that for a long moment. 2 people who barely knew each other, finding comfort in simple human contact. When Lily pulled back, she was smiling, a real smile this time, bright and uncomplicated. "I'm glad you got off at the wrong stop, Miss Clara. Is that bad to say?" Clara laughed, a rusty sound that surprised her. "Maybe a little, but I understand what you mean." "Will you stay for supper? Papa's making stew. He's not a very good cook, but the stew is usually all right if you don't think about it too much." "I'd be honored to stay for supper." They went back to the main room where Jonah was indeed making stew, chopping carrots and potatoes with quick, efficient movements and adding them to a pot hanging over the fire. He looked up when they entered, his eyes going to his daughter's bright face, and something in his expression softened just slightly. "She talk your ear off?" he asked. "Just enough," Clara said. Jonah went back to his chopping. "She's good at that. Talks enough for both of us most days." They settled into an easy routine, Lily setting the table, chattering about school and her friend Sarah and the stray dog that kept coming around looking for scraps, while Jonah worked at the stove in silence and Clara sat by the fire letting her clothes finish drying. It was domestic and comfortable in a way that made Clara's chest ache. This was what a home felt like. This was what she'd been missing without quite knowing it. The stew was better than Lily had promised, simple but hearty, thick with vegetables and bits of meat, seasoned with herbs from the bundles hanging overhead. They ate together at the small table, and for a little while Clara could almost pretend she belonged here. Almost pretend this was her life, her home, her family, her place. But it wasn't. She was a stranger who'd made a mistake, and tomorrow she'd move on to the life she'd actually chosen. This was just a pause, a brief shelter in a storm, nothing more. After dinner, Jonas sent Lily to get ready for bed while he and Clara cleaned up. They worked in silence, passing dishes back and forth, and Clara became acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved with careful economy, the scars on his hands, the gray threading through his dark hair. He was younger than she'd first thought, she realized. The weathering and the grief had aged him, but beneath it he was probably no more than 35. "Thank you again," she said as she dried the last plate. "For all of this. You didn't have to help me." "Lily wouldn't have forgiven me if I hadn't," Jonas said, but there was no humor in it. "Still, not everyone would have done what you did." He was quiet for a moment, staring into the dishwater. "My wife used to say that kindness doesn't cost anything," he said finally. "She was wrong about that. Kindness costs plenty, but I guess I still try to do it anyway, for her sake." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They finished cleaning in silence, and then Jonas showed her where things were. The privy outside, the water bucket, the extra blankets if she got cold. He was formal and distant again, the brief moment of vulnerability already closed off. "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he said, and disappeared into his own room. Clara went to the room that had belonged to a dead woman and changed into the borrowed nightgown. She lay in the narrow bed under heavy quilts and listened to the wind howl outside, feeling the storm Jonah had predicted beginning to arrive. Snow ticked against the window like small fingers asking to be let in. She should have felt afraid. She was stranded in a strange place, sleeping in a stranger's house, about to marry a man she'd never met. But instead, wrapped in warmth and quilts, she felt something else entirely. She felt safe. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara Whitmore felt safe. And that, more than anything, told her how far she'd fallen. That this accidental shelter felt more like home than anything she'd known in years. That a stern blacksmith and his grieving daughter felt more like family than her own blood ever had. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Inside, Clara closed her eyes and let herself sink into sleep. And for one night at least, she didn't dream of the future waiting for her in Ashpoint. She dreamed instead of firelight and kindness and a little girl's hand in hers. She dreamed of the wrong stop that somehow felt more right than any destination she'd chosen for herself. Clara woke to the sound of small feet padding across wooden floors and the smell of something burning. For a moment, disoriented by sleep and unfamiliar surroundings, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The train, the mistake, the little girl with dark eyes who'd pulled her out of the snow. Jonah Blackridge's cabin, the room that still held traces of a dead woman's life. She sat up quickly, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders against the morning cold, and opened the door to find Lily standing on a chair at the stove, poking anxiously at something in a pan that was producing alarming amounts of smoke. "Good morning," Clara said carefully. Lily jumped, nearly falling off the chair. She turned with a guilty expression that would have been comical if not for the very real danger of the smoking pan. "I was trying to make breakfast," she said in a small voice. "Papa's already at the forge, and I wanted to surprise him, but the eggs won't stop burning." Clara crossed the room quickly and moved the pan off the heat. The eggs inside were indeed beyond saving, black and smoking, stuck to the iron surface in a way that would take serious scrubbing to fix. "It's all right," she said. "The stove probably got too hot. Where's your father?" "Working." Lily climbed down from the chair, looking miserable. "He always works early. He says the forge won't heat itself and we need the money. I thought if I made breakfast, he wouldn't have to stop, but now I've ruined it and wasted the eggs, and he's going to be disappointed." The child's distress was so genuine and so familiar, that desperate need to be useful, to not be a burden, that Clara felt her heart constrict. She knelt down and took Lily's hands in hers. "Your father isn't going to be disappointed. He's going to see that you tried to do something kind, and that's what matters. Now, why don't you show me where he keeps the rest of the eggs, and we'll start again? Together this time." Lily's face brightened immediately. "Really? You know how to cook?" "I do." Clara stood and surveyed the small kitchen area. "I'm not fancy at it, but I can manage eggs and whatever else your father has on hand. But I'll need your help. You know where everything is." They worked together in the quiet morning light filtering through the windows. Lily showed Clara where the eggs were kept cool in a box outside, where the bread was stored, where her father kept the butter and salt. The child chattered as they worked, her earlier distress forgotten in the pleasure of having someone to help and teach her. "Papa tries," Lily explained as she carefully cracked eggs into a bowl under Clara's supervision. "But he's not very good at cooking. Mama did all of it before and he never learned. He burns everything, or he forgets to add salt, or he gets distracted with his work and lets things boil over. Last week he left a pot on the fire all day, and when he remembered it, all the water was gone and the bottom was black." Clara listened while she sliced bread and found a clean pan. The picture emerging was of a man doing his best in impossible circumstances, working long hours to support himself and his daughter, trying to fill roles he'd never been trained for, carrying the weight of grief and responsibility without complaint. "It sounds like your father works very hard," she said. "He does." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact. "Everyone says he's the best blacksmith in the territory. People come from Ashpoint proper sometimes to have him make things special. But he doesn't charge enough, Sarah's mama says. She says he's too honest for his own good." They finished preparing breakfast, eggs cooked properly this time, bread toasted over the fire, butter melting into golden pools. Clara found plates and utensils, and Lily set the table with the same grave concentration she brought to every task. By the time they heard the door to the forge open and Jonah's heavy footsteps approaching, everything was ready. He came in covered in soot and sweat despite the cold, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw the table, his eyes moving from the food to his daughter to Clara, and something complicated passed across his face. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you didn't have to." "I wanted to," Clara interrupted gently. "Lily was kind enough to help me find everything. I hope you don't mind." Jonah looked at his daughter, who was practically vibrating with pride and excitement. "Did you try to cook again?" he asked. "I burned the eggs," Lily admitted. "But Miss Clara showed me how to do it right. Papa, did you know you're supposed to wait until the pan is warm but not too hot? And you have to keep stirring or they stick? I never knew that." A smile tugged in the corner of Jonah's mouth, just a ghost of one, but real. "I didn't know that either," he said. He moved to the table, still looking uncertain about this domestic scene he'd walked into. "I should wash up first." "We'll wait," Clara said. He disappeared into his room and returned a few minutes later, face and hands scrubbed clean, his work apron replaced with a simple shirt. They sat together at the table, the three of them, and for a moment no one spoke. Clara was suddenly aware of how intimate this was, sharing a meal, sitting in the morning quiet, pretending at being something they weren't. "I checked the weather," Jonah said finally, serving eggs onto Lily's plate. "Storm came through hard last night. Road to Ash Point proper is going to be impassable until it gets cleared, and that won't happen for at least 2 days, maybe 3. Clara's hand stilled on her fork. 3 days? Maybe more if another storm rolls in behind this one. He met her eyes across the table. "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you planned." 3 days. 3 more days trapped here, imposing on the hospitality of strangers, while Samuel Thornton waited for a bride who never arrived. She should have been panicking, should have been desperate to find another way, any way, to reach Ash Point proper. Instead, she felt something disturbingly close to relief. "It can't be helped," she heard herself say. "I'm grateful you're willing to let me stay." "You'll have to earn your keep," Jonah said bluntly. "I can't afford to feed an extra mouth for 3 days without getting something in return. You can cook, seems like. Can you do other things?" It should have stung. The transactional nature of it, the reminder that she was a burden. But Clara understood necessity. She'd lived it long enough. "I can clean, mend clothes, tend a house," she said. "I can read and write and do arithmetic. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Papa needs lots of help," Lily piped up. "The house is always messy, and there's mending piled up, and nobody's cleaned the windows in forever, and—" "Lily," Jonah said, but without heat. He looked at Clara with something that might have been embarrassment. "She's not wrong. I keep things functional, but that's about it. If you're willing to help with the household tasks, I'd be grateful. And I'll make sure you get to Ash Point as soon as the road clears." "That's more than fair," Clara said. They finished breakfast in more comfortable silence. The food was simple but good, and Clara watched Lily eat with the single-minded focus of a hungry child, while Jonah drank his coffee and stared at something only he could see. When the plates were empty, Lily volunteered to help Clara clean up while Jonah returned to the forge. "He has a big order," Lily explained as they washed dishes. "Some man from Ash Point proper wants fancy iron gates for his house. Papa's been working on them for weeks. They're beautiful, all curved and twisted like vines. Papa can make iron do anything." "He must be very skilled," Clara said. "He is." Pride rang in the child's voice. "Mama used to say he had artist's hands, even though they were all scarred and rough. She said he could make beauty out of hard things, and that was a special gift." Clara heard the echo of love in those words. The dead wife's love for her husband, preserved and repeated by their daughter like a prayer. It made her chest ache. They spent the morning working through the accumulated neglect of a house kept by a grieving widower and his young daughter. Clara swept floors and scrubbed the soot from around the fireplace, while Lily dusted shelves and chattered about school. Her friend Sarah, the teacher who was mean sometimes but mostly fair. The child followed her from task to task like a small shadow, helping where she could and talking constantly, as if afraid silence might make Clara disappear. Around midday, Jonah came in for water and stopped short at the sight of his transformed home. The floors were clean, the dishes put away, the clutter organized. Clara had found the mending basket and was working through it with quick, efficient stitches while Lily practiced her letters at the table. "It looks different," he said after a moment. "I hope that's all right," Clara said. "I didn't move anything important, just tidied. It's fine." He filled a cup with water and drank it down, his eyes moving around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "It's good. I didn't realize how much I'd let things go." "Papa," Lily said, looking up from her slate, "can Miss Clara stay for supper too, please?" Jonah's eyes met Clara's over his daughter's head. She saw the question there, the uncertainty. He was a man unaccustomed to having strangers in his space, to owing or being owed anything beyond simple transactions. "Of course she's staying for supper," he said. "She's staying until the road clears. We talked about this, Lily." "I know, but I thought maybe—" Lily trailed off, then brightened. "Can we have something special, since Miss Clara's here? Can we use the preserves Mama made?" Something shifted in Jonah's expression. Pain, quick and sharp, there and gone. "If Miss Whitmore wants to go to that trouble," he said carefully, "I should get back to work." He left before either of them could respond, the door closing behind him with perhaps more force than necessary. Lily watched him go with worry creasing her small forehead. "He doesn't like talking about Mama," she said quietly. "It makes him sad." Clara set down her mending. "That's all right. Grief doesn't follow rules about when it's convenient to feel." "Miss Clara?" Lily's voice was very small. "Do you think Papa will ever stop being sad?" It was the kind of question that had no good answer, the kind children asked because they didn't yet understand that some questions couldn't be answered with simple truth. Clara thought about her own grief, about the holes her parents had left, about the empty spaces that never quite filled no matter how much time passed. "I think the sadness gets easier to carry," she said finally. "It doesn't go away, but you get stronger at holding it. And sometimes there's room for other feelings too, happy ones, even while you're still sad. Does that make sense?" Lily nodded slowly. "I think so." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Were you sad? Before you came here?" The question caught Clara off guard with its directness. "Yes," she admitted. "I was very sad. I still am, sometimes." "Is that why you're marrying Mr. Thornton, to stop being sad?" Clara opened her mouth to give some easy platitude, then stopped. This child deserved honesty. "I'm marrying Mr. Thornton because I need security," she said. "I don't have family or money, and women like me don't have many choices. Marriage is practical. It's survival." "But Mama said—" "I know what your Mama said." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "And she was right that love is important. But sometimes we have to make choices based on what's possible, not what's ideal. Your Papa understands that, I think. He's a practical man." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. "I still think you should marry someone you love," she said finally. "Even if it's harder." "You might be right," Clara admitted. "But the world doesn't always give us that choice." They returned to their tasks, but the conversation had planted something in Clara's mind, an uncomfortable awareness of the choice she was making, of what she was trading away for security. Samuel Thornton's letters had been clear about expectations. He wanted a competent household manager, a woman who would bear his children and maintain his social standing. He didn't want a partner or a companion. He certainly didn't want love. And Clara had agreed to it, had signed her name to letters accepting those terms, had traveled halfway across the country to fulfill a contract that reduced her to a function, a role, a solution to a practical problem. In Philadelphia, desperate and alone, it had seemed like the only option. Here, in this warm cabin with a child who talked about love like it mattered, and a father who carried his grief with quiet dignity, it seemed like something else entirely. It seemed like surrender. The afternoon passed in simple domesticity. Clara cooked while Lily helped, the two of them talking and laughing over small things, burnt edges on the bread, a pot that boiled over, Lily's dramatic retelling of a story from school. Through the window, Clara could see Jonah at his forge, rhythmically hammering iron, his body moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this work for years. Steam rose from the quenching bucket. Sparks flew and died in the snow. It was beautiful in its own way. The marriage of strength and skill, the transformation of raw metal into something useful and lovely. Clara found herself watching more than she should, found herself wondering about the man behind the hammer. What had he been like before grief hollowed him out? What had his wife seen in him that made her speak of artists' hands and beauty from hard things? "He likes you," Lily said, catching Clara watching. Clara startled. "What?" "Papa, he likes you. I can tell." Lily stirred the pot of stew with great concentration. "He doesn't usually let people stay. Last year when Mr. Henderson got drunk and couldn't make it home, Papa made him sleep in the forge instead of the house. But he gave you Mama's room." "That's just being practical," Clara said, but her cheeks felt warm. "He couldn't let me freeze. He could have taken you to the saloon, or the supply depot, or somewhere else." Lily looked up at her with those two knowing eyes. "He wanted you to stay here. That means something." "Lily, I don't think—" "And you like him too," Lily continued with a child's ruthless honesty. "You keep looking at him when you think nobody's watching, and you smile different when he talks." Clara opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. What could she say? That she'd noticed Jonah Blackridge's hands and his careful movements and the way sadness sat on him like a weight? That she'd felt safer in one night under his roof than she had in months of planning her practical marriage? That some traitorous part of her was grateful for the storm that trapped her here? "It doesn't matter what I feel," she said finally. "I'm promised to someone else. And your father is still in love with your mother. Some things just aren't meant to be, no matter what we might wish." Lily's face fell. "But no buts, sweetheart. That's just how the world works sometimes." They finished cooking in subdued silence. When everything was ready, Lily went to fetch her father while Clara set the table. She used the good dishes. She'd found them wrapped carefully on a high shelf. And the preserves Lily had mentioned, jewel-bright jars of fruit put up by hands that would never open them. It felt presumptuous, using a dead woman's carefully saved things, but Lily had asked and Clara didn't have the heart to refuse. Jonah came in looking exhausted, his face smudged with soot despite obvious attempts to clean up. He stopped when he saw the table, the good dishes, the preserves, the careful arrangement that spoke of something more than simple necessity. "Lily wanted it special," Clara said quickly. "I hope that's all right." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the jar of preserves, peaches, golden and perfect, trapped in glass and sugar. "Mary made those," he said quietly, "the summer before she died. Last batch she ever put up." "We can use something else," Clara said. "I'm sorry, I should have asked—" "No." Jonah moved to the table and sat down heavily. "No, this is—" She would have wanted them used. She always said preserves were meant for special occasions, and then she'd save them too long and they'd go bad. "This is good. This is right." They ate together as darkness fell outside and the fire crackled in the hearth. The food was good, better than good, if Clara was honest. She'd found her rhythm in the small kitchen, had cooked with real ingredients and time to do it properly, and the result was a meal that felt like care made tangible. Jonah ate with the focused attention of a man unaccustomed to good cooking. Lily chattered between bites, telling her father everything they'd done that day. The cleaning, the mending, the letters she'd practiced. She made it sound like an adventure, her enthusiasm transforming mundane tasks into something magical. And Jonah listened, really listened, his eyes on his daughter's animated face, occasionally asking questions or making quiet comments that made Lily glow with pride. Clara watched them together and felt something crack open in her chest. This was what family looked like. This was what love looked like, even love scarred by loss. After supper, Lily begged Clara to read to her. "Papa tries," she explained, "but he's not very good at the voices, and he falls asleep sometimes because he's so tired." "I do not fall asleep," Jonah protested, but without much conviction. "You do. Last week you were reading Jack and the Beanstalk, and you fell asleep right when Jack was climbing up, and I had to wake you up to find out what happened." Clara laughed, couldn't help it. The image of this stern, scarred man falling asleep mid-fairy tale while his daughter waited impatiently for the ending was too perfect. "I'll read," she said. If your father doesn't mind. Jonah met her eyes across the room. I don't mind, he said, and something in his voice made Clara's breath catch. They settled by the fire. Lily curled against Clara's side, the book open on her lap, while Jonah sat in his chair and pretended to work on a piece of leather that needed mending. Clara read about princesses and magic beans and impossible quests, doing the voices like her mother used to do when Clara was small. Lily was rapt, hanging on every word, occasionally interrupting with questions or observations. Clara became aware that Jonah had stopped pretending to work and was watching them. Not just Lily, but both of them together. His expression was complicated, layered with things she couldn't read. Longing, maybe. Or regret. Or just the simple pain of seeing his daughter happy with someone who would inevitably leave. When the story ended and Lily's eyes were heavy with sleep, Jonah stood and scooped his daughter up with easy strength. Time for bed, little one. But I'm not tired, Lily protested, even as she yawned hugely. Not tired at all. Jonah's voice was warm with affection, and Clara heard the man he must have been before. Before loss, before hardship, before the world demanded he become stone. He carried Lily to her room, and Clara heard their quiet voices through the door. The murmur of nighttime prayers, the rustle of blankets, Jonah's low voice saying something that made Lily giggle. When he emerged, closing the door softly behind him, his expression had shuddered again, the brief warmth locked away. Thank you, he said, for reading to her, for all of it. Today, the house, the cooking, everything. You've given me shelter, Clara said. It's the least I can do. Still, he moved to the fireplace and added another log, his movements precise and controlled. She's happier than I've seen her in a long time. That matters. Clara stood, unsure suddenly of where she belonged in this space. I should let you rest. I'm sure you're exhausted. Clara. Her name in his rough voice made her stop. Can I ask you something? Of course. This man you're going to marry, Samuel Thornton, do you love him? The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Clara thought about lying, about giving the easy answer, but something in Jonah's eyes demanded honesty. No, she said. I've never met him. We've only exchanged letters. The arrangement is practical. Practical, Jonah repeated. He turned to face her fully. You're going to spend the rest of your life with a stranger because it's practical. Yes. Clara lifted her chin. Because I don't have the luxury of marrying for love. Because women like me, women without money or family or prospects, we marry for survival. We take what security we can find and we're grateful for it. And you think you'll be happy living like that? I think happiness is a luxury too. Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. I think I'll be fed and housed and safe, and that's more than I have now. That's more than most people get. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low. Mary and I married for love. We had 5 good years together before she got sick. 5 years of being happy, being partners, being... He stopped, his jaw working. Being everything to each other. And then she died. And it broke something in me I don't think will ever heal right. You know what I learned from that? Clara shook her head, not trusting her voice. I learned that love is worth it, Jonah said, even knowing how it ends. Even carrying this grief every day. I wouldn't trade those 5 years for anything. Not for ease, not for safety, not for a practical arrangement that spared me this pain. Because at least I had something real. At least I knew what it was to be truly known by another person. Tears burned in Clara's eyes. Not everyone gets that choice. You're getting a choice right now. Jonah took a step closer. You could say no. You could tell Thornton you changed your mind. You could choose something different. And do what? Clara's voice broke. Where would I go? How would I survive? I have nothing, Jonah. No money, no family, no prospects except the one I agreed to. I can't just walk away from security because some part of me wishes things were different. You could stay here. The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples in every direction. Clara stared at him, not quite believing what she'd heard. What? You could stay here, Jonah repeated, And now there was color in his cheeks, uncertainty in his eyes. Help with the house, with Lily. I can't pay much, but I can offer room and board and honest work. It wouldn't be anything more than that. Just employment. Just a chance to choose something different than marrying a stranger for security. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. You're offering me a job. Yes. Jonah's hands flexed at his sides. I'm offering you a choice, stay or go. Marry Thornton or don't. But at least know you have options. She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to say yes so badly it frightened her. Wanted to stay in this warm cabin with this broken man and his loving daughter. Wanted to keep cooking meals and reading stories and pretending she belonged somewhere. But wanting wasn't enough. Wanting didn't change the realities of her situation. I can't, she whispered. Jonah, I can't. I signed a contract. I made a promise. And even if I didn't, I can't just... People would talk. A single woman living in a widower's house? It would ruin your reputation, hurt Lily's prospects. I can't do that to you. Let people talk. His voice was fierce now. Let them say whatever they want. I know what this is. An offer of honest work, nothing improper. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth worrying about. You say that now, but I say it because I mean it. Jonah closed the distance between them, and Clara could see the determination in his gray eyes, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. I know I'm asking a lot. I know it's complicated. But Lily needs someone, and you're good with her, and the house needs managing, and you're capable. And I could use the help, that's all I'm saying, nothing more than that. But it was more than that. They both knew it. The air between them was charged with everything they weren't saying. The attraction neither would name, the possibility of something growing between broken pieces, the dangerous hope that maybe there could be another choice. Clara closed her eyes, fighting against the pull of it. I have to think, she managed. I can't. I need to think. That's fair. Jonah stepped back, giving her space. You've got 2 more days before the road clears. Think about it, and whatever you decide, I'll respect it. He went to his room and closed the door, leaving Clara alone by the dying fire. She sank into a chair and put her face in her hands, her mind spinning with impossible choices and dangerous wants. In one direction lay safety, marriage to Samuel Thornton, security, the life she'd planned and agreed to. It would be loveless but stable, practical but hollow. She would have a place in the world, even if that place felt like a cage. In the other direction lay risk, staying here, working for Jonah, building something undefined and uncertain. It would mean defying expectations, weathering gossip, living on the edge of propriety. It would mean trusting a man she barely knew and hoping that what she felt stirring between them was real and not just the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been shown kindness. Both choices terrified her. Both felt like falling. Outside, wind rattled the windows and snow continued to fall, extending her deadline, giving her time she didn't want. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to decide who she was going to become and what she was willing to risk for the possibility of something more than mere survival. Clara sat alone in the firelight and tried to imagine both futures, tried to see herself as Mrs. Samuel Thornton, respectable and secure and empty. Tried to see herself here, in this cabin, watching Lily grow and maybe, someday, finding her way past grief and fear to something like happiness. Neither vision was clear. Neither felt certain, but one felt like safety, and the other felt like hope, and Clara was beginning to understand that those were not the same thing at all. She didn't sleep well that night, tossing in the narrow bed that still smelled faintly of lavender and loss. And when she finally drifted off near dawn, she dreamed not of grand houses and security, but of small hands reaching for hers and gray eyes that looked at her like she mattered. She dreamed of choices that felt like freedom, even when they looked like falling. Morning brought no answers, only pale winter light filtering through frost-covered windows, and the sound of Lily's excited voice calling her name. Clara dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes. She'd washed her own dress, but it was still damp, and emerged to find Lily practically bouncing with energy, her face flushed and her eyes bright with something that looked like fever. Miss Clara, Papa said we can make cookies today if you know how. Do you know how? Can we make the ones with sugar on top? Mama used to make those and they were the best things ever. And Lily, slow down. Clara pressed a hand to the child's forehead and felt heat radiating from her skin. "Sweetheart, you're burning up." "I'm fine," Lily insisted, but even as she said it, she swayed slightly on her feet. "I feel great. I want to make cookies and then maybe we can play in the snow and you're going back to bed." Clara took the child's hand, alarmed by how hot it felt. "Where's your father?" "At the forge already. He said I could get up when you woke up, and I did, so I'm up and I want to—" Lily's words dissolved into a harsh, rattling cough that bent her double. Clara's alarm crystallized into fear. She'd seen illness before, knew how quickly children could go from cheerful to desperately sick. She scooped Lily up, the child weighed almost nothing, and carried her back to bed, ignoring her weak protests. "I'm going to get your father," Clara said firmly. "You stay here and rest. But the cookies—" "We'll make cookies when you're better, I promise." She wrapped Lily in every blanket she could find, then ran through the cold morning air to the forge where Jonah was already working, his hammer ringing against heated iron. He looked up when she burst in, and whatever he saw in her face made him drop his tools immediately. "What's wrong?" "It's Lily. She has a fever, a bad one." Jonah was moving before she finished speaking, striding past her toward the cabin with long, urgent steps. Clara followed, her heart pounding. By the time she caught up, he was already in Lily's room, his large hand gentle on her forehead, his face carved from stone. "Papa, I'm fine," Lily said weakly. "Don't worry. I just need to rest a little and then—" Another cough cut her off, this one worse than before. "How long has she been like this?" Jonah's voice was steady, but Clara heard the fear underneath. "She was excited when I woke up, talking fast. I thought she was just being Lily, but when I touched her—" Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "It came on fast." Jonah nodded curtly. "It does that sometimes. Children burn hot and quick." He stood and moved to a cabinet, pulling out a tin box. "I have willow bark for the fever. And there's a woman 2 miles west, Mrs. Chen, who knows medicine. I'll have to go get her." 2 miles in this snow? Jonah, that could take hours. "You have a better idea." He was already pulling on his heavy coat. "She needs more help than I can give her." "Then I'll go." "You don't know the way." "So draw me a map. You need to stay here with Lily. She needs her father." Clara moved closer, lowering her voice so the child wouldn't hear. "And if something happens while you're gone, do you want her to be with a stranger or with you?" Jonah's jaw worked. He looked back at his daughter, small and flushed in the big bed, and Clara saw the war happening behind his eyes, the need to do something fighting against the terror of leaving her. "I'll go," Clara repeated. "Tell me where to find this woman and I'll bring her back." "Clara, you could get lost. The snow's deep and the wind can turn you around in minutes. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." She held his gaze. "Lily needs help. Let me help her." For a long moment, Jonah just looked at her. Then he nodded once, sharp and certain. "All right, but you follow my directions exactly. You understand? Don't try to take shortcuts or guess your way. If you get turned around, you stay put and wait for the weather to clear. Don't be a hero." "I won't." He drew her a map with quick, sure strokes, explaining landmarks. A dead tree shaped like a pointing finger, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, the creek that ran east to west that she needed to follow. "Mrs. Chen's cabin is right on the creek, small but solid. Smoke should be coming from the chimney. You can't miss it if you follow this route." Clara memorized every detail, committing the map to memory like her life depended on it, because it might. Jonah gave her his heaviest coat, his warmest gloves, a scarf to wrap around her face. He pressed something into her hand, a small knife in a leather sheath. "Just in case," he said. "Wolves usually leave people alone, but it's better to have it." "Wolves?" Clara swallowed hard and nodded. "Papa?" Lily's voice came from the bedroom, small and frightened. "Don't go, please don't go." Jonah's face cracked just for a moment. He went to his daughter and knelt beside the bed, taking her hot little hand in his. "I'm not going anywhere, little one. Miss Clara is going to get Mrs. Chen for us. I'll be right here the whole time." "Promise?" "I promise." He kissed her forehead. "You're going to be fine. You're strong, like your mama was." Clara watched them together and felt her resolve harden into something unbreakable. She would get through that snow. She would find Mrs. Chen. She would bring help back to this child who'd shown her kindness when she had nothing left. She set out into the white wilderness with Jonah's directions clutched in her gloved hand and fear driving every step. The snow was deeper than she'd expected, reaching past her knees in places, and the cold bit through even the heavy coat. But she pushed forward, watching for the landmarks Jonah had described. The dead tree appeared after 20 minutes of hard walking, its bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like skeletal fingers. Clara turned west as instructed, following a path that was more suggestion than reality, her breath coming in white clouds that froze on the scarf covering her face. The wind picked up, driving snow into her eyes and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Clara pulled the scarf tighter and kept moving. She thought about Lily's bright eyes and quick smile, about Jonah's desperate fear carefully hidden, about how quickly she'd come to care about these strangers who'd shown her more kindness in 2 days than she'd known in months. The rock formation took longer to find. She'd almost walked past it before recognizing the vague bear shape in the tumbled stones. Relief flooded through her. She was on the right path. The creek should be just ahead, but the wind was getting worse, whipping snow into blinding curtains. Clara pushed forward, one hand outstretched, trying to feel her way through the whiteout. Her feet found the edge of the creek more by accident than design. She slipped on the icy bank and barely caught herself before tumbling into the freezing water below. She followed the creek westward, fighting the wind with every step. Time lost meaning. She might have been walking for minutes or hours. Her face was numb, her fingers aching even in the thick gloves. She started to understand what Jonah had meant about getting turned around. In this wind, in this snow, she could barely tell which direction she was moving. But then, through a gap in the blowing snow, she saw it, smoke rising from a chimney, a small cabin built tight against the creek bank. Clara almost sobbed with relief. She staggered forward, half running, and pounded on the door with numb fists. The woman who answered was small and ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her black eyes sharp and knowing. She took one look at Clara and pulled her inside without a word. "Lily Blackridge," Clara gasped out. "Fever, bad cough. Jonah sent me—" "I know Lily." Mrs. Chen was already moving, gathering supplies into a worn leather bag with practiced efficiency. "How long has she been sick?" "She seemed fine yesterday. This morning she had the fever. Quick onset, not good." Mrs. Chen pulled on layers of clothing, moving faster than seemed possible for someone so old. "We go now. You can walk back?" "Yes." Clara hoped it was true. They went back out into the storm together, Mrs. Chen moving through the snow with the surety of someone who knew this land intimately. She set a pace that Clara struggled to match, but she forced her exhausted body to keep moving. Lily needed help. That was all that mattered. The journey back felt longer, harder. Clara's legs were shaking with fatigue, her lungs burning from breathing cold air. But Mrs. Chen was relentless, never slowing, never stopping, and Clara wouldn't let herself fall behind. When they finally stumbled into the cabin, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Jonah was there immediately, catching her before she could fall, his hands strong and steady. "You made it," he said, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "You actually made it." Course she made it. Mrs. Chen was already in Lily's room, her gnarled hands on the child's flushed face, her expression grave. "Strong girl, this one. Smart, too, to find me in that wind." Clara sank into a chair, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Jonah brought her hot tea and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his movements gentle. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know what you risked. Thank you." Clara just nodded, too tired for words. She watched Mrs. Chen work, mixing herbs, heating water, her weathered hands moving with absolute confidence. The old woman made Lily drink bitter tea and applied cool cloths to her burning skin, all while murmuring in a language Clara didn't understand. "The fever will break or it won't," Mrs. Chen said finally, her English heavily accented but clear. "Next few hours will tell. We keep her cool, keep her drinking, and we wait." "That's it?" Jonah's voice was strained. "Just wait?" "Sometimes waiting is all we can do." Mrs. Chen's eyes were kind. "I've seen this before. Children her age, they fight hard. Strong spirit, your Lily, like her mother was. Jonah's face went carefully blank at the mention of his wife, but he nodded. What do you need me to do? Nothing. You watch, you worry, you pray if you're the praying kind. Mrs. Chen patted his arm. I'll stay through the night. Storm's too bad to go back now anyway. So began the longest night of Clara's life. They took turns sitting with Lily, cooling her fever-hot skin, coaxing sips of tea past her cracked lips. The child drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and asking for water, sometimes fevered and calling for her mama in a voice that broke Clara's heart. Clara sat through the midnight hours, sponging Lily's forehead, while Jonah dozed fitfully in a chair nearby. She watched the child struggle through dreams, watched her small chest rise and fall with labored breathing, and felt fear crystallize into something harder, determination. This child would not die. Clara wouldn't allow it. Miss Clara? Lily's voice was a raspy whisper. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm cold. Clara pulled the blankets higher, but Lily pushed them away with weak hands. No, not that kind of cold. Inside cold, like when Mama left. You're going to be fine, Clara said firmly. The fever will break and you'll be your cheerful self again. What if it doesn't? Lily's eyes were too bright, glittering with fever and fear. What if I have to go where Mama went? Papa will be all alone. You're not going anywhere. Clara took the small hand in hers, holding tight. You're going to stay right here and grow up and make cookies with too much sugar on top and drive your father crazy with questions. That's what's going to happen. Promise? Clara thought about all the promises she'd broken, all the times she'd let people down. But she looked at this child's trusting face and knew she would move heaven and earth to keep this one promise. I promise, she said. Lily's eyes drifted closed, her breathing evened out slightly, and Clara felt the first faint hope that maybe the worst was passing. Jonah woke with a start, instantly alert. How is she? Better, I think. The fever feels a little lower. He came to the bedside and touched his daughter's forehead with gentle fingers. Something in his shoulders relaxed just slightly. You're right, it's breaking. They looked at each other across Lily's sleeping form, and Clara saw everything he wasn't saying written in his eyes. Gratitude, relief, something deeper that made her breath catch. You should rest, he said. You've been up for hours. So have you. I'm used to it. That doesn't mean you don't need rest. Clara stood, her joints protesting. But you're right. I should sleep for a while. She made it to the doorway before Jonah spoke again. Clara? She turned back. What you did today, going out in that storm, bringing Mrs. Chen back, that was... He stopped, struggled for words. That was everything. You saved her life. You know that, don't you? We don't know that yet. I know it. His voice was rough with emotion. And I won't forget it. Whatever you decide about staying or going, about Thornton or anything else, I want you to know that you'll always have a place here. Always. You're family now, as far as I'm concerned. Family. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd been alone for so long, had forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, to matter to someone beyond what she could provide. She's a special child, Clara managed. Anyone would have done the same. No, Jonah said. They wouldn't, but you did. Clara went to her room and lay down fully clothed, too exhausted to do more. She closed her eyes and felt tears sliding down her temples. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something else she couldn't quite name. Through the walls, she could hear Jonah's low voice talking to his daughter, could hear Mrs. Chen moving around the cabin with quiet confidence. She'd been here 3 days. 3 days, and already this place felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived since her mother died. These people felt more like family than her own blood had in years. And tomorrow, or the day after, the road would clear and she would have to choose. Marry Samuel Thornton as planned, or stay here in this uncertain situation with this broken family that had somehow adopted her. The choice should have been obvious: security over sentiment, practicality over emotion. That was how smart women survived. But lying in the dark, listening to the sounds of this cabin settling around her, Clara found herself wanting something she'd thought she'd given up on. She wanted to be chosen, Not for what she could provide or how she could be useful, but for herself. She wanted to matter the way family mattered, the way love mattered. She wanted to stay. The realization terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure, because wanting something wasn't enough. She would have to choose it, would have to break her word to Samuel Thornton, would have to risk scandal and reputation, would have to trust that what she felt growing between herself and Jonah and Lily was real, and not just the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been drowning. She fell asleep still wrestling with the question, and dreamed of small hands reaching for hers and gray eyes that looked at her like she was worth saving. When Clara woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, weak winter sunlight, but sunlight nonetheless. The storm had passed. She got up and went to check on Lily, her heart in her throat. The child was sitting up in bed, pale but conscious, sipping broth that Mrs. Chen was spooning to her with patient care. When Lily saw Clara, her face lit up with a smile. "Miss Clara, you're awake. Papa said you walked through a blizzard to save me. Is that true?" "It was barely a blizzard," Clara said, her voice unsteady with relief. "More like enthusiastic snow." Lily giggled, then coughed, but it was a lighter sound than before. The crisis had passed. The child would live. Mrs. Chen caught Clara's eye and nodded approvingly. "Strong girl," she said again. "Both of you. Strong girls. Good match for each other." Clara felt her cheeks heat at the implication, but before she could respond, Jonah appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn. But when he saw his daughter sitting up and smiling, something in him seemed to crack open. "Hey, little one," he said, his voice rough. "How are you feeling?" "Better? Mrs. Chen made me magic tea, and Miss Clara promised I'm not going to die, and I believe her because she walked through a blizzard." "It really wasn't a blizzard," Clara protested weakly. "Sounded like a blizzard to me," Jonah said, and there was warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. "Sounded like the bravest thing I've heard of in a long time." Clara had to look away from the intensity of his gaze. She busied herself checking Lily's forehead, gratified to find it cool to the touch. The fever had indeed broken. The child would need rest and care, but she would recover. Mrs. Chen stayed through the day, making sure Lily was truly on the mend before she would consent to leave. By late afternoon, satisfied that the danger had passed, she packed up her supplies and prepared to make the journey home. "You pay me later," she said when Jonah tried to press money into her hands. "When you have it. For now, you take care of your girls." "Your girls?" Clara felt the word settle over her like a benediction and a warning both. After Mrs. Chen left, the cabin fell into a peaceful quiet. Lily dozed on and off, her color improving by the hour. Jonah worked in the forge for a few hours, but came back frequently to check on his daughter, his relief palpable every time he saw her breathing easy. Clara cooked and cleaned and tried not to think about the choice looming over her. The road would be clear by tomorrow, probably. She would have to decide. That evening, after Lily had eaten a real meal and fallen into healthy sleep, Clara and Jonah sat together by the fire. They didn't talk, just sat in companionable silence, both exhausted, both still processing how close they'd come to tragedy. Finally, Jonah spoke. "I meant what I said last night, about you being family, that offer to stay. It still stands. It'll always stand." Clara stared into the flames. "I've been thinking about it." And I'm terrified." She turned to look at him. "I'm terrified of choosing wrong, of staying and finding out this is all just gratitude or circumstance, of going and spending the rest of my life wondering what if. I don't know how to make this choice." Jonah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "I see someone brave enough to walk into a blizzard for a child she barely knows. Someone capable and kind and strong enough to survive things that would have broken most people. I see someone my daughter loves already, someone who makes this cabin feel like a home again, instead of just a place we survive in." He paused, then continued. "And I see someone I could care about, if I let myself. Someone I might already care about more than I should." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Jonah, I'm not asking you to feel the same way," he interrupted. "I'm just being honest. Because you deserve honesty. If you stay, it'll be complicated. People will talk. It'll be hard work for little pay. But you'll be safe and valued and—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "And wanted. You'll be wanted here. By both of us." Tears burned in Clara's eyes. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this." "You walked through a blizzard," Jonah said simply. "You're brave enough for anything." They sat together in the firelight, and Clara felt the weight of the choice settling over her like snow. In one direction lay safety and certainty and a loveless, practical arrangement. In the other lay risk and possibility and the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have something real. She thought about Lily's small hand in hers, about Jonah's careful kindness, about the way this cabin had felt like home from the first night. She thought about Samuel Thornton's letters with their lists of expectations and requirements. She thought about what her life would look like in 5 years, 10 years, if she chose security over hope. And somewhere in that quiet contemplation, surrounded by firelight and the sleeping breath of a child in the next room, Clara felt the choice crystallize into certainty. She knew what she wanted. Now she just had to be brave enough to reach for it. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the world look newly made. Clara woke with her decision settled in her chest like a stone, heavy but solid, something she could stand on. She would stay. The practicalities terrified her. She would need to write to Samuel Thornton, to break a promise she'd traveled halfway across the country to keep. She would need to face whatever consequences came from that choice. But sitting up in the narrow bed, watching dust motes dance in the morning light, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt certain. She dressed and went to the main room where Jonah was already up making coffee with the concentrated focus of a man trying not to burn it. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression told her he'd been waiting, hoping, dreading what she might say. "Good morning," Clara said. "Morning." Jonah poured coffee with careful hands. "Lily's still sleeping, Mrs. Chen said she'd need a few days of rest before she's back to herself." "That's good." Clara accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "Jonah, about what we talked about last night." The knock on the door cut her off, loud, authoritative, demanding. They both froze, looking at each other with matching confusion. No one came calling this early unless something was wrong. Jonah opened the door to reveal a man Clara had never seen before, tall and well-dressed, his coat expensive wool, his boots polished despite the muddy road. He was perhaps 40, with thinning hair combed carefully across his scalp, and pale eyes that assessed everything with calculating precision. "Jonah Blackridge," the man said, and his voice matched his appearance, smooth, educated, used to being obeyed. "I'm looking for a woman. Mail-order bride traveling alone should have arrived on the train 4 days ago. Young, dark hair, carrying a broken suitcase. The conductor said someone matching that description got off at this stop by mistake." Claire's blood turned to ice. She knew who this was before he said his name. "I'm Samuel Thornton," the man continued when Jonah didn't immediately respond. "And I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jonah's expression went carefully neutral, but Clara saw his shoulders tense. "I don't think I do." "Don't play games with me, Blackridge. The woman, Clara Whitmore, she's contracted to marry me. If she's here, I have a right to know." "Clara," Jonah said without turning around, "do you want to talk to this man?" Samuel's eyes found her standing behind Jonah, and his face shifted into something that might have been relief if it had held any warmth. "There you are. Miss Whitmore, I've been searching for you. When you didn't arrive in Ash Point as expected, I was concerned." Concerned. The word was so inadequate, so devoid of actual feeling, that Clara almost laughed. This was the man she had agreed to marry. This cold, calculating stranger who looked at her like she was a misplaced package rather than a person. "Mr. Thornton," she managed. "I apologize for the confusion. I got off at the wrong stop and the storm prevented me from traveling on. Mr. Blackridge was kind enough to offer shelter." "I see." Samuel's eyes moved past her, taking in the cabin's interior, the dishes from breakfast still on the table, Clara's dress hanging by the fire to dry, the unmistakable signs of domesticity. His mouth tightened. And you've been here 4 days, unchaperoned, in a bachelor's household? My daughter was here the whole time, Jonah said, his voice flat. And there was a storm. She had no other options. Nevertheless, appearances matter. Samuel stepped inside without invitation, his boots tracking mud across the clean floor Clara had scrubbed just yesterday. Miss Whitmore, gather your things. I have a carriage waiting to take us to Ashpoint. We've lost enough time already. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but Lily's voice interrupted from the bedroom doorway. Papa? Who's that man? Why is he being mean? Samuel's eyes went to the child standing there in her nightgown, her hair tangled from sleep, and his expression tightened further. This is your daughter? This is Lily, Jonah said, moving to his daughter and resting a protective hand on her shoulder. Lily, go back to bed. You're supposed to be resting. But, now please. Lily looked between her father and Samuel, with worry creasing her small face, but she obeyed, casting one last frightened glance at Clara before disappearing back into her room. Samuel waited until the door closed before speaking again. Miss Whitmore, I'll be direct. Whatever arrangement you've come to here, it ends now. You signed a contract. You gave your word. I've invested significant time and money into this engagement, and I expect you to honor your commitment. Mr. Thornton, Clara started, I understand you may have formed some attachment during your stay here. Samuel's voice dripped with condescension. But let's be realistic. You're a penniless woman with no prospects. I'm offering you security, status, a respectable position. Whatever this man has promised you, I assure you he cannot provide what I can. Jonah's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, his eyes on Clara. Waiting. Letting her fight her own battle. Clara looked at Samuel Thornton, really looked at him. Saw the expensive clothes and the cold calculation behind his eyes. Saw the way he stood in this cabin like he owned it, owned her, owned everything his money could touch. Saw the future she'd almost chosen, a gilded cage where she would be fed and housed and utterly alone. You're right, she said quietly. You can offer me things Mr. Blackridge cannot. Money, status, security. Samuel's expression shifted toward satisfaction. Exactly. Now, if you'll just... But he's offered me something you never could. Claire's voice was steady now, growing stronger. He's offered me respect, kindness, a place where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. He's offered me a choice. Miss Whitmore, don't be foolish. I'm not being foolish. For the first time in a very long time, I'm being smart. Clara moved to stand beside Jonah, a deliberate statement of where she belonged. I'm breaking our contract, Mr. Thornton. I'm not going to marry you. Samuel's face darkened. You signed an agreement. You gave your word. I paid for your train ticket, arranged for your arrival, and I'll pay you back. Clara lifted her chin. Every penny. It may take time, but I'll repay what you spent. But I won't marry you. I can't. This is ridiculous. Samuel turned his anger on Jonah. You did this. You seduced her, filled her head with romantic nonsense. She was perfectly willing to fulfill her contract until she spent time under your roof. I offered her a choice, Jonah said, his voice dangerously quiet. Something you apparently never did, and she made it. You should respect that. Respect? Samuel's laugh was ugly. You want me to respect this? You're a widowed blacksmith barely scraping by, and you think you can steal another man's bride and call it respectable. Everyone in Ashpoint will know about this. They'll know she spent days unchaperoned in your home. They'll know what that means. It means she had shelter during a storm, Jonah said. That's all it means. Is it? Samuel's smile was cruel. Because from where I stand, it looks like something else entirely. A desperate woman, a lonely widower, days alone together. People will draw their own conclusions, and those conclusions won't be kind. Clara felt cold seeping through her chest. She'd known there would be talk, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made it real. Samuel was right about one thing. Appearances mattered, especially for women with no family or fortune to shield them. Let them talk, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. I've made my choice. Then you're a fool. Samuel straightened his coat with sharp movements. And when this little fantasy falls apart, when you realize what you've given up, Don't come crawling back to Ash Point looking for another arrangement. You'll find all the doors closed to you. He strode to the door, then paused and looked back. You too, Blackridge. You think this won't affect your business? You think people will want to work with a man who steals another's bride? You've made an enemy today. I hope she's worth it. The door slammed behind him, leaving a ringing silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen, the weight of what she'd just done crashing down on her. She'd broken a contract, made an enemy of a wealthy, influential man, put Jonah's livelihood at risk. And for what? For the possibility of something that might not even work out? Clara, Jonah's voice was gentle. Look at me. She turned to face him and saw no anger in his expression, no blame, just steady certainty. You can still go, he said. If you want to change your mind, go after him. I'll understand. Is that what you want? No. The word was immediate, absolute. But this has to be your choice alone. I won't have you staying out of obligation or fear. Before Clara could respond, Lily burst out of her room. You're staying. Miss Clara, you're really staying. Lily, you should be in bed. I heard everything. Lily ran to Clara and threw her arms around her waist. You told that mean man you're staying with us. You're staying. Clara looked down at the child clinging to her, then up at Jonah, watching them with something raw and hopeful in his eyes. This was her choice. This was what she'd chosen. This makeshift family, this uncertain future, this leap into the unknown. Yes, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm staying. Lily's whoop of joy echoed through the cabin. She danced around the room, fever and illness apparently forgotten in her excitement. Papa, did you hear? She's staying. We get to keep her. I heard, little one. Jonah was smiling, actually smiling, wide and genuine and transforming. I heard, but the joy was short-lived. Later that day, after Lily had been coaxed back to bed and the cabin had settled into quiet, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Mrs. Henderson from 3 cabins over, her face pinched with barely contained disapproval. Mr. Blackridge, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. A word, if you please. Jonah stepped outside, and Clara watched through the window as Mrs. Henderson talked, her hands gesturing sharply. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the woman's body language, accusatory, scandalized, righteously angry. When Jonah came back inside, his expression was carefully controlled. What did she say? Clara asked, though she already knew. That it's improper for you to be staying here, that people are talking, that I should either marry you immediately or send you away. He met her eyes. She wasn't kind about it. I see. There will be more, Jonah warned. Mrs. Henderson is just the first. Others will come. They'll have opinions about what's proper and what's not. Clara sat down heavily. I've brought trouble to your door. Samuel was right about that, at least. Samuel Thornton is a pompous ass who thinks his money makes him right about everything. Jonah pulled up a chair across from her. But he's not wrong about the talk. This will affect both of us. It might affect my business. It will definitely affect Lily. Then what do we do? Jonah was quiet for a long moment. We could do what Mrs. Henderson suggested, get married, make it official and proper. Clara's heart stuttered. Jonah, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, but it would solve a lot of problems. You'd have protection, a legal position. People would have less to gossip about. He leaned forward, his eyes serious. But I want you to understand something. If we did this, it would be a practical arrangement, like what you had with Thornton, just with someone you actually know. I wouldn't expect anything from you that you weren't willing to give. We'd be partners, helping each other, raising Lily together, nothing more unless you wanted it to be. A marriage of convenience, Clara said. Yes, exactly that. Clara thought about it, about the safety of a legal marriage, about the shield it would provide against gossip and scandal. It was practical. It made sense. It would solve so many problems. But it also felt like surrender, like she'd traveled all this way, broken one contract only to bind herself to another, like she'd traded one gilded cage for another, even if this one had a kinder keeper. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Jonah stood. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know it's an option. Whatever you decide, you're welcome here as long as you want to stay. Over the next 2 days, the pressure mounted. More neighbors came by with thinly veiled concerns. The general store owner was cold when Clara went to buy supplies. Women she passed on the road whispered behind their hands. Even the children at Lily's school started asking questions that made her come home with confusion in her eyes. "Sarah's mama says you're a bad woman," Lily reported one afternoon, her voice small and hurt. "She says Papa shouldn't let you stay here. But you're not bad, are you, Miss Clara?" "No, sweetheart, I'm not bad. I just made choices that some people don't understand." "I understand them," Lily said fiercely. "You chose us. That's a good choice." But the child's loyalty couldn't shield them from the growing hostility. Jonah's business began to slow, not stopping entirely, but enough that Clara noticed him staying later at the forge, working harder on fewer commissions. He never complained, never suggested it was her fault, but Clara felt the weight of it anyway. On the third day after Samuel's visit, Clara made up her mind. She found Jonah at the forge, hammering iron with methodical precision, and waited until he paused to wipe his brow. "I'll marry you," she said without preamble. Jonah set down his hammer carefully. "Clara, not because of the gossip, not because it's practical or convenient." She moved closer, her heart pounding. "I'll marry you because I want to, because I choose to, because in the short time I've been here, you and Lily have become more important to me than my own safety. Because when I think about the future, I want it to be here, with both of you." "You're sure?" "I'm terrified," Claire admitted, "but I'm sure." Jonah closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He took her face in his scarred, gentle hands and looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not," he said. "I'm still grieving Mary. I probably always will be, at least a little. But I care about you, Clara, more than I expected to, more than I thought I could." "That's enough," Clara whispered. "That's more than enough." He kissed her then, softly, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. Clara felt tears streaming down her face and didn't care. This wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks, but it was real. It was honest. It was 2 broken people choosing to be less broken together. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jonah was smiling. "We should tell Lily." They found her at the cabin, practicing her letters with intense concentration. When they told her the news, she erupted with joy, throwing herself at both of them and talking a mile a minute about weddings and dresses and whether they could have cake. "Can I call you Mama?" she asked Clara suddenly, her excitement dimming to something more serious. "Or would that make you sad? Or make Papa sad?" Clara looked at Jonah, saw the complicated emotions playing across his face, grief and hope, and fear all tangled together. He nodded slowly. "I would be honored," Clara said, pulling the child close. "So honored, sweetheart." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the cabin, with Mrs. Chen as witness and Lily as an overly excited flower girl. There was no grand celebration, no fancy dress. Clara wore the one good dress she owned, mended and clean, and Jonah wore his Sunday shirt with his work-scarred hands scrubbed until they were raw. The justice of the peace who performed the ceremony was kind but brief. He spoke of commitment and partnership and building a life together, and Clara felt each word settle over her like a blessing and a promise both. When it was done and Jonah kissed her, proper and real in front of witnesses, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. This was it. This was the moment her new life actually began, not when she got off the train at the wrong stop, not when Lily tugged at her dress, but here, now, choosing this man and this child and this uncertain future with clear eyes and an open heart. The reaction from Ash Point Station was mixed. Some people softened, accepting the marriage as proof that everything had been proper all along. Others remained hostile, whispering that the quick ceremony just proved their suspicions. Samuel Thornton, they heard through gossip, had been furious, had made good on his threat to badmouth Jonah to potential clients in Ash Point proper. But Clara found she didn't care as much as she'd expected. Let them talk. Let them judge. She had a home now, a family, people who mattered to her and who she mattered to. That was worth more than all the approval in the world. Still, the consequences were real. Jonah's business continued to slow. Money got tighter. Clara stretched every penny, made their supplies last, cooked meals from almost nothing. They managed, but barely. Then one evening, 2 weeks after the wedding, there was a knock at the door. Clara opened it to find a well-dressed woman standing there, older with kind eyes and expensive clothes. "Mrs. Blackridge?" the woman asked. "Yes?" Clara still wasn't used to the name. "I'm Elizabeth Thornton, Samuel's sister." She paused. "May I come in?" Clara's first instinct was to slam the door, but something in the woman's expression stopped her. She stepped aside and let Elizabeth enter. Jonah emerged from the forge, alert and wary. "Mrs. Thornton." "Mr. Blackridge." Elizabeth looked around the cabin with curious eyes. "I apologize for coming unannounced. I wanted to meet the woman who turned down my brother." "If you've come to cause trouble," Jonah started, "I've come to apologize." Elizabeth turned to Clara. "My brother can be difficult, controlling. He's used to getting what he wants, and he doesn't handle disappointment well. What he did, threatening you, trying to ruin your husband's business, it was petty and cruel." "You're his sister," Clara said carefully. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I know what it's like to be trapped by someone else's expectations." Elizabeth's voice was quiet but firm. "I was married off young to a man I didn't love because it was practical, because it made sense financially. I've spent 30 years in a comfortable cage, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. You were brave to choose differently." She reached into her bag and pulled out a leather purse, heavy with coins. "This is payment for ironwork I want commissioned, gates for my property in Denver. Samuel will be furious if he finds out, but I don't care. You need the work, and I want to support what you've built here." Jonah stared at the purse, then at Elizabeth. "Ma'am, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's a commission. I've seen your work. My brother may be petty, but he has good taste in craftsmen. I expect quality iron delivered on time for the price we agree on. That's business, Mr. Blackridge, not charity." She placed the purse on the table. "I'll send detailed specifications next week. Take your time with the work. I'm not in a hurry. And Mrs. Blackridge?" She looked at Clara with something like admiration. "You chose well. I hope you'll be very happy." After she left, Clara and Jonah stared at each other in stunned silence. Then Lily, who'd been hiding in her room, burst out with questions, and they spent the evening explaining what had just happened, what it meant, how sometimes help came from the most unexpected places. That night, lying in bed beside Jonah in the darkness, they'd moved her things into his room after the wedding, though they'd done nothing more than sleep side by side. Clara felt something like peace settling over her. "Clara?" Jonah's voice was quiet. "Yes? No regrets?" She thought about Samuel Thornton and the life she might have had. Thought about the security and status she'd given up. Then she thought about Lily's laughter and Jonah's careful kindness and this cabin that had become home. "No regrets," she said. "You?" "None." His hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Not a single one." They lay together in the quiet dark, and Clara felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she belonged, not because it was easy or practical or safe, but because she'd chosen it, because she'd chosen them, because sometimes the wrong stop turned out to be exactly the right place after all. Spring came slowly to Nevada territory, thawing the frozen ground inch by stubborn inch and painting the brown landscape with tentative green. Clara stood in the doorway of the cabin watching Lily chase butterflies through the muddy yard and marveled at how much had changed in 4 months. The commission from Elizabeth Thornton had saved them through the worst of winter. Jonah had worked on those gates with painstaking care, pouring all his skill into iron shaped like climbing roses and morning glories. When they were finally finished and shipped to Denver, the payment that came back was generous enough to see them through until other work started trickling in again. But the hostility from Ash Point Station hadn't entirely faded. Some people had softened, accepting the marriage as proof of propriety. Others remained cold, their judgment a constant weight. Clara felt it every time she went to the general store, every time she passed women on the road who turned away rather than greet her. She'd learned to carry that weight, to wear their disapproval like armor rather than letting it cut her. What surprised her was how little it mattered in the face of what she'd gained. Mama! Lily's voice called across the yard. Mama, come see! I caught one! Mama. The word still sent a warm shock through Clara's chest every time she heard it. She walked out to where Lily stood with cupped hands, her face glowing with achievement. Look, it's so pretty! Clara peered into the cage of Lily's small fingers and saw an orange butterfly, its wings beating frantically. It is beautiful, but I think it wants to go back to its flowers, don't you? Lily considered this seriously, then opened her hands. The butterfly paused for just a moment on her palm before taking flight, dancing away on the spring breeze. Bye, butterfly. Come back and visit. You're getting mud everywhere, Clara observed, looking at Lily's boots and dress with amused resignation. I know. Isn't it wonderful? Lily spun in a circle, arms outstretched. Winter was so long and now everything is alive again. Clara laughed and reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. The child had bloomed over the past months, had grown taller, stronger, more confident. The shadows that had lived in her eyes were fading, replaced by the uncomplicated joy of a child who felt secure and loved. Your father will be home soon, Clara said. Why don't you go wash up before supper? Will there be pie? You said you might make pie if the dried apples held out. There will be pie. Lily whooped and ran toward the cabin, leaving muddy footprints that Clara would have to clean later. But watching her go, Clara felt only contentment. This was what home looked like, messy and imperfect and full of small joys. Jonah came home as the sun was setting, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes bright. Sold 3 horseshoes and got a commission for a weather vane, he announced, kissing Clara's cheek in greeting, a habit they'd fallen into over the months, these small displays of affection that felt more real than any grand gesture. The Hendersons' oldest boy is getting married and wants something special for his new house. The Hendersons? Clara raised an eyebrow. I thought Mrs. Henderson wasn't speaking to us. Money talks louder than judgment, apparently. Jonah washed his hands at the basin. Or maybe she's just tired of being angry. People get tired of that eventually. They ate supper together as darkness fell outside. The 3 of them at the small table, talking about their days in that easy way families do when they've settled into each other's rhythms. Lily chattered about school and her friend Sarah, who'd been allowed to play with her again now that the worst of the scandal had passed. Jonah talked about the weather vane design he was planning. Clara listened and contributed and felt the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged. After Lily was tucked into bed, Clara and Jonah sat together on the front step, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. They did this most nights now, shared these quiet moments when the day's work was done, and they could just exist beside each other without purpose or agenda. I've been thinking, Jonah said after a while. That's dangerous. He smiled slightly. About leaving. Clara's chest tightened. Leaving? Not you and me. All of us. Leaving Ash Point Station. He turned to face her. There's nothing keeping us here except habit and stubbornness. The work's drying up again. That commission from Henderson is good, but it's not enough. People here will never fully forgive us for not caring what they think. And I don't want Lily growing up in a place where people whisper about her mother. Clara was quiet, processing this. Where would we go? West. There's land opening up past the Sierra Nevada, valleys where they say the soil is rich and the weather's mild. We could homestead, build something new. His voice grew more animated. I could still work iron. Every settlement needs a blacksmith. But we'd have land too, space to grow things, to build a real home. A fresh start where nobody knows our history or cares about old scandals. That's a big risk, Clara said carefully. Everything we know is here. Everything we know is people who judge us and work that's barely enough to survive on. Jonah took her hand. I know it's scary. I know it's uncertain. But Clara, I'm tired of just surviving. I want us to actually live, all 3 of us. Don't you want that? Clara looked out at the darkness beyond their small circle of lamplight and thought about what Jonah was proposing. It was terrifying, leaving the little security they'd managed to build, heading into unknown territory, risking everything on the possibility of something better. Every practical instinct she had screamed against it. But then she thought about Lily asking why Sarah's mother said mean things about them. Thought about the closed faces and cold shoulders she encountered every time she went to town. Thought about spending the rest of her life in a place that would never let her forget she'd made choices they couldn't forgive. "Yes," she said. "I want that. I want all of us to have a fresh start." Jonah's relief was palpable. He pulled her close and kissed her properly. Not the careful, gentle kisses of early marriage, but something deeper that spoke of real affection growing between them. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he was smiling. "We'll need to plan carefully," he said. "Save money, get supplies, wait for the right weather. Probably late spring or early summer before we can actually go." "That gives us time to prepare." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "And time to say goodbye to the few people here who've been kind." "Mrs. Chen will be disappointed to lose her best student in wound treatment." Clara smiled. Over the winter, she'd spent time learning from the old woman, not just medicine, but the stories and wisdom Mrs. Chen carried. It would be hard to leave her, but the pull of possibility was stronger than the comfort of the familiar. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, planning and dreaming and slowly building the shape of their new future. That night, lying in bed with Jonah's arm around her waist and his breath steady in sleep behind her, Clara felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. She felt hopeful. The next morning, Clara went into Ash Point proper for the first time since her wedding. She needed to place an order at the general store, and she'd been putting it off, dreading the encounter. But if they were planning to leave, she needed to stop hiding. The store was crowded when she arrived. Several women clustered near the counter, their voices carrying across the space. Clara recognized Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's mother, and two others whose names she'd never learned. They fell silent when they saw her, their eyes tracking her movements with undisguised hostility. Clara lifted her chin and walked to the counter. "Mr. Graves, I need to place an order." The shopkeeper looked uncomfortable, glancing between Clara and the watching women. "Of course, Mrs. Blackridge. What do you need?" Clara read off her list while silence stretched behind her like a physical thing. She could feel their judgment, their whispered conversations waiting to resume the moment she left. Once it would have destroyed her. Now it just made her tired. "That man of yours still taking work?" Mr. Graves asked as he tallied her order. "He is. Why?" "Got a broken wagon wheel, needs repair. Iron rim split clean through. Can he fix it?" "He can fix anything." Clara met his eyes. "When do you need it done?" "Soon as possible. I'll pay fair." One of the women behind her made a small sound of disapproval. Clara ignored it. "I'll tell him. He'll come by tomorrow to look at it." She paid for her order and turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson stepped into her path. The woman's face was hard, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. "You've got nerve coming in here like nothing's wrong." "I have as much right to be here as anyone," Clara said quietly. "Do you? You broke a contract, made a respectable man look like a fool. Took up with Jonah Blackridge before the ink was dry on your broken promise." Mrs. Henderson's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of everyone in the store. "You think we've forgotten? You think time makes it right?" Clara felt heat rising in her face, felt the old fear trying to claw its way up her throat. But beneath it was something harder, anger that she'd been holding back for months. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "I broke a contract. I made a choice that hurt Samuel Thornton's pride. But let me ask you something, Mrs. Henderson. Would you have wanted your daughter to marry a man she'd never met? A man who saw her as property he'd purchased rather than a person with her own hopes and dreams? That's not the point. That's exactly the point." Clara took a step forward, and Mrs. Henderson actually stepped back. "I was desperate when I agreed to that arrangement. I was alone and scared, and I thought security was more important than anything else. But then I met people who showed me kindness without asking for anything in return, who gave me a choice, who treated me like I mattered. And yes, I chose them over a contract. I'd make the same choice again. You seduced a grieving widower. I fell in love with a good man." Clara's voice broke slightly on the words, but she pushed through. "And he fell in love with me. Not because either of us planned it, but because sometimes life gives you unexpected chances at happiness, and you have to be brave enough to take them. I'm sorry if that offends your sense of propriety. I'm sorry my choices made you uncomfortable. But I won't apologize for choosing love over security, or for building a family with people who wanted me." The store was dead silent. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone red, her mouth working without sound. The other women looked between Clara and each other with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been reluctant admiration. "You have no shame," Mrs. Henderson finally managed. "No," Clara agreed. "I don't, not about this. I'm proud of the life I'm building. I'm proud of my husband and my daughter and the home we've made. And if that makes me shameless in your eyes, I can live with that." She walked past Mrs. Henderson and out of the store, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She made it halfway down the muddy street before she had to stop, leaning against a building, shaking with adrenaline and leftover fear. That was quite a speech. Clara looked up to find Sarah's mother standing nearby, one of the women who'd been in the store watching the confrontation. Her name was Margaret, Clara remembered. She'd always been quieter than Mrs. Henderson, less openly hostile. "I didn't mean to cause a scene," Clara said. "Didn't you?" Margaret's mouth quirked slightly. "Looked to me like you meant every word." "I did." Clara straightened. "I'm tired of apologizing for choices I'm not sorry for." Margaret nodded slowly. "My Sarah talks about Lily constantly. Says she's her best friend, says Lily's mother tells the best stories and makes the best cookies, and helped her understand arithmetic when nobody else could." She paused. "Children see things clearly sometimes. They don't care about scandal or propriety. They just know who's kind and who's not." "Lily loves Sarah," Clara said carefully, not sure where this was going. "I know. And I've been keeping them apart because Mrs. Henderson said it wasn't appropriate, because people were talking, because I was afraid of what it would look like if I let my daughter spend time at your house." Margaret looked down at her hands. "But watching you in there, standing up for yourself and your family, I think I've been a coward. And I'm sorry for that." Clara blinked back sudden tears. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do. You deserved better from this community. You deserved better from me." Margaret met her eyes. "Sarah's been asking to invite Lily over for supper. Would next week work? I'd like all of you to come, you, Jonah, and Lily. It's past time I got to know my daughter's best friend's family properly." "We'd like that," Clara managed. "Thank you." Margaret nodded and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the muddy street with something warm and unexpected blooming in her chest. Maybe not everyone would forgive her choices. Maybe Mrs. Henderson would hold her grudge until the end of time. But some people, enough people, were willing to see past scandal to the truth underneath. It was enough. It was more than enough. When Clara got home and told Jonah about both the confrontation and Margaret's invitation, he pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I'm proud of you," he said against her hair, "for standing up for yourself, for not letting them make you feel small." "I learned from watching you," Clara said. "You never let them make you feel like you did anything wrong." "That's because I didn't. We didn't." He pulled back to look at her. "And now we're going to go somewhere we can just live without all this weight. Somewhere Lily can grow up without hearing whispers about her parents. Somewhere we can be a family without having to justify it to anyone." They spent the next months preparing in secret. Jonah worked extra hours to save money, taking commissions wherever he could find them. Clara preserved food, mended clothes, until they could barely take another stitch, and saved every penny she could squeeze from their household budget. They told only Mrs. Chen and Margaret of their plans, swearing both to secrecy. Mrs. Chen took the news with her usual pragmatic acceptance. "You go find your fortune," she said. "But you come back and visit old woman sometimes, yes? I teach you too much medicine for you to forget me." "Never," Clara promised, hugging the tiny woman carefully. "I could never forget you." Margaret was sadder but understanding. "Sarah will miss Lily terribly, but I understand why you're going. Sometimes you have to leave to find where you really belong." The dinner at Margaret's house had been the first of several, tentative at first, then warmer as the weeks passed. Other families had slowly followed Margaret's example, cautiously opening their doors. Not everyone, and not without reservation, but enough that Clara began to feel like they had actual friends in Ashpoint Station, which made leaving harder, but also more necessary. Because Clara realized she didn't want Lily growing up grateful for scraps of acceptance. She wanted her daughter to grow up somewhere she could simply belong, without qualifications or whispered histories. By late May, they were ready. Jonah had built a sturdy wagon and bought 2 horses from a farmer whose son had moved east. They'd accumulated supplies, saved enough money to survive on for several months, and said their careful goodbyes to the few people who mattered. The night before they left, Clara stood in the cabin that had been her home for 6 months and felt a complicated mix of emotions. This place had saved her, had given her shelter when she needed it most, had been the setting for her transformation from desperate mail-order bride to wife, mother, and woman who knew her own worth. "No regrets?" Jonah asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Clara leaned back against him. "About leaving? No, this place served its purpose, but we've outgrown it." "What about him? Thornton? Do you ever wonder what that life would have been like?" Clara thought about Samuel Thornton's cold eyes and calculating voice, thought about the gilded cage she would have lived in, comfortable and empty and utterly alone. "No," she said honestly. "I wonder about a lot of things, but never that. That was never really a choice. It was just the only option I could see at the time. And now? Now I have you and Lily and this beautiful, terrifying possibility of building something new. Now I have choices." She turned in his arms to face him. "Real choices, and I choose this every single day." He kissed her deeply, and Clara felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was love, not the desperate passion of romance novels, but something steadier and more real. It was choosing each other through difficulty, building trust in small daily acts of kindness, becoming partners in the truest sense of the word. They left at dawn the next morning, the wagon loaded with everything they owned and Lily bouncing with excitement beside them. A few people came to see them off: Margaret and Sarah, Mrs. Chen, Mr. Graves from the general store. Even some of the men Jonah had worked with over the years showed up to shake his hand and wish them luck. Mrs. Henderson was conspicuously absent. Clara found she didn't care. "Where are we going exactly?" Lily asked as the wagon rolled out of Ashpoint Station for the last time. "West," Jonah said, "toward California. There's a valley I heard about where the land is good and they need skilled workers." "Will there be butterflies?" "Millions of them," Clara promised, pulling Lily close. "And flowers and trees and wide open spaces where you can run as far as you want." "And friends? Will I make friends?" "The best friends," Jonah said. "Friends who will know you for who you are, not for anything else." They traveled for weeks, following wagon trails and river valleys, joining up with other families heading west, and then splitting off again when their paths diverged. The journey was hard. There were days of brutal sun and nights of bitter cold, river crossings that left them soaked and exhausted, stretches of road where Lily cried from tiredness and Clara had to dig deep to find the strength to keep going. But there were beautiful moments, too. Sunsets that painted the sky in colors Clara had never imagined. Nights camped under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Mornings waking up to find deer grazing nearby, completely unafraid, and always the 3 of them together, facing each challenge as a unit. They reached the valley Jonah had been aiming for in late July. It was everything the rumors had promised, green and fertile, with a small but growing settlement of families who'd come seeking the same fresh start. The people were friendly without being intrusive, curious about the newcomers but not judgmental. They claimed land 2 miles from the main settlement, near a creek that ran year-round. The property had a small, rough cabin already built by a previous homesteader who'd given up and moved on, and Jonah immediately began planning improvements. An addition for Lily as she got older, a proper workshop for his forge, a garden space for Clara. "What do you think?" he asked Clara as they stood surveying their new home. Clara looked at the cabin that needed work, the land that would require back-breaking effort to cultivate, the uncertain future stretching before them. Then she looked at Lily running toward the creek, shouting with joy, and at Jonah standing beside her with hope in his eyes. "I think it's perfect," she said. They worked through the rest of summer and into fall, transforming the rough homestead into something like a real home. Jonah set up his forge and quickly gained a reputation for quality work. Clara planted a garden. Too late for this year, but ready for next spring. Lily started at the local school and came home every day with stories about her new friends and the nice teacher and how nobody cared where she came from. As winter approached again, their second winter together, But their first in this new place, Clara took stock of how far they'd come. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd stepped off a train at the wrong stop. She was no longer afraid of making choices or standing up for herself. She'd become someone she barely recognized, stronger, surer, more certain of her own worth. One evening in late November, after Lily was asleep and snow was just beginning to fall outside, Jonah pulled Clara close and said, "I never properly thanked you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to get off that train at the wrong stop. For staying when you could have left. For choosing us." He kissed her forehead. "For making me remember what it feels like to build a future instead of just surviving each day." "You saved me," Clara said. "Both of you. You gave me a reason to stop running and start living." "We saved each other," Jonah corrected. "That's what families do." Clara smiled and settled more comfortably against him. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in white. But inside, the fire burned warm and steady, and Clara felt peace settle over her like a blessing. This was where she belonged. Not in Ash Point Station, not in Philadelphia, not in Samuel Thornton's grand house in Ash Point proper. Here, in this rough cabin in a valley she'd never heard of until a few months ago, with a man she'd met by accident and a child who'd grabbed her dress and said, "Daddy needs you." The wrong stop had become the right place. The mistake had become destiny. And Clara, who'd once thought happiness was a luxury she couldn't afford, had found it anyway in the most unexpected of circumstances. Years later, when Lily was grown and had children of her own, she would ask her mother to tell the story of how she'd come to their family. And Clara would tell it all, the desperate journey west, the wrong stop, the little girl's plea, the choice that changed everything. She'd tell it honestly, without smoothing over the hard parts or pretending it had been easy. "But Mama," Lily's daughter would ask, "weren't you scared? Weren't you afraid you were making a mistake?" And Clara would smile and say, "Terrified. But the best things in life usually require us to be brave, and sometimes the biggest mistakes turn out to be the best decisions we ever make." Because that was the truth of it. Clara had stepped off a train at the wrong stop, broke a contract, scandalized a community, and risked everything for an uncertain future. And in doing so, she'd found exactly what she'd been looking for all along, even though she hadn't known she was looking for it. She'd found home. Not in a place, but in people. In a little girl's trust, and a grieving widower's careful kindness. In the daily work of building a life together. In the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, through good times and hard ones. The mail-order bride who got off at the wrong stop had found her right place after all. And it was more beautiful, more real, and more precious than any destination she could have planned for herself. Sometimes, Clara thought, as she watched snow fall outside her window that long-ago winter evening, the best journeys are the ones we never meant to take. And sometimes home is found not in arriving where we intended, but in being brave enough to stay when we end up somewhere unexpected. This was her home. This was her family. This was her life, chosen freely, built carefully, cherished deeply. And it had all started with one simple mistake, one wrong stop, and a little girl who'd had the wisdom to know that sometimes the people who need us most are the ones we never planned to meet.